everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. Today we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which does include some early numbers and some early projections for what the Christmas Day numbers are going to be looking like. As we all know, not only are we entering into a weekend frame, we're also entering into a very unique holiday frame where some films are actually premiering on Sunday, Monday, with Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, respectively. By the way, a very early Merry Christmas to everyone out there as we are continuing on through this Advent season. So there's going to be a ton of films to talk about, but I'm going to try to focus just on a few, especially those that have the broadest implications for various studios, especially those studios that have been suffering and struggling at the box office throughout the course of the year. And this would, of course, include the movie coming out tonight, Aquaman 2, and how the prospects for this film just aren't looking all that great, especially when you take into account that a lot of this money probably for this movie will be coming from the international markets. And as we all know, very little money is actually received in the international markets as far as what the actual studio take is. You saw that more recently in the full breakdown I did of why Disney is projected to lose around $1.5+ billion this year just from their theatrical releases. And so all of that has to be taken into account with a film like Aquaman 2. But all the while, we are seeing likely the color purple not having as strong as an opening weekend as I'm sure they would have expected or would have wanted, especially a movie that probably will end up costing a bit more than it probably should have. To be honest, I would not be surprised to see The Color Purple do very similar to the Spielberg West Side Story, where it's cost around $100 million, where it really shouldn't have cost that amount, and then it did not make anything back at the box office because, again, it was not the kind of movie that was going to be making the kind of money you would need to get the break-even point of a $100 million budgeted film. But Wonka is, I think, honestly going to be showing, and we're already kind of seeing some of these numbers showing, that it is probably holding a bit better and will probably be that film that stays strong and holds strong throughout the course of the entire Christmas holiday, and will probably still able to, because of that, make up some ground and in the long term break even and maybe make some profit as well. Before we go any further though into these numbers though, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button, Aussie, and smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification. That way you know every time your video or live stream goes live on the channel. So first we got Tony and Nance over at Deadline together again, saying Aquaman to the big fish in the Warner Brothers Christmas troika with Wonka and The Color Purple, but holiday box office not looking bright. As we all, again, could have expected, they are trying to continue to be cutesy with their headlines in this way, and ultimately what they're saying is that Warner Brothers has 3 releases coming out over the holiday season, and whereas in the past, a studio might have been able to have kind of like a 1-2-3 punch with a combination like this going after very different audiences, it's not looking like that's going to be the case here. In fact, of those 3, Wonka is the one that probably will end up being a winner, whereas Aquaman 2 probably will end up being yet another massive box office loser, especially since it is the last, I believe it is the last official DCEU movie before the James Gunn universe officially takes over. And so with that being said, and with many people knowing that this film won't really have a lot of ramifications for the future of this universe, and already a lot of the people who would have been in that audience back when the first Aquaman film came out probably have already kind of packed up and left, saying, okay, I'm kind of done with this franchise, I'm kind of done with this character, I'm done with all of the characters, to be brutally honest. And so Aquaman 2 definitely not looking like that's going to do much of anything. And again, Color Purple probably will end up making about as much money as it should, but will probably have cost a lot more than anything else. As they say, after the domestic box office that's been battered by double strikes, exhibition, and the industry overall, we can thank Warner Brothers for leaving 3 potential $100 million grossing movies under the tree: Aquaman, The Lost Kingdom, Wonka, and The Color Purple. Now, Deadline will always try to make the best out of even the most dire situations, right? These are a group of people that will always ignore the fact that massive flops like The Marvels, massive flops like Blue Beetle, and others were flops because not only are audiences just totally, not checked into what's coming out in theaters anymore because they are a lot more careful with how they spend their money, but also because a lot of the films that have been coming out have just been garbage, have just not been good. When we've seen films get a lot of good natural word of mouth, we've seen that they have done very, very well, right? So unless it is a film that has a guaranteed certain demographic or a guaranteed built-in audience, we could say they have just not been able to crack the code in other places. It used to be that you could put DCEU see on a title, Aquaman in a movie. You could put, again, any branded name on a film, and you could expect a certain level of return on investment. That's just not the case anymore. I think obviously a lot of that has to do with COVID, people being, of course, a lot more aware of their money, but it's not just because of the COVID, it's also because of inflation as well, right? The dollar today does not get you exactly what you would have gotten even just a year or two ago. So people are a lot more wary of how they spend. And you add all of these things together with just these movies not being very good and just being very by the numbers, or just even worse than that, it makes a lot of sense as to why they're just not doing much of anything. And so, yeah, Warner Brothers, when you say it's potential for $100 million movies for each of them in each of those cases, $100 million for an Aquaman movie is not a good thing. If you mean an $100 million opening weekend, I don't think that the numbers themselves seem to be indicating that, at least domestically. So once again, it seems like y'all are kind of pulling numbers from everywhere, trying to paint a narrative that y'all want to actually paint. But it goes on to say, in addition to Warner's 3 big pictures, there's another 5 wide releases north of 1,000 theaters opening by Christmas Day, including Illumination Universal's Migration, The Iron Claw from A24. It's a film I have my ticket to go see tonight. I'm very, very excited to go see that. Another film called Anyone But You, and a MGM World War II Amazon production of The Boys in the Boat, next to Neon STX Michael Mann directed Ferrari, all coming out around Christmas Day. Now here is where, again, these numbers start to be a little bit cautious, and not in a good way, for a movie like Aquaman. As it says, Aquaman Lost Kingdom is expected to do around $40 million over the 4-day Christmas weekend. While that's possibly a lower gross than even the Marvel's 3-day start, and many might be quick to scream superhero fatigue, there are a couple of factors in hand. So here he is going to, again, Tony and Nance going to explain away why this is not as bad as it seems, right? Even though we know the Marvels was a massive flop, so much so that Disney gave up on it just a few weeks into its release, right? That film's going to lose well north of $200 million for Disney in and of itself. That's just nothing in comparison to the $1.5 billion in losses they're having this year. But Warner Brothers really isn't all that much better. The one real win Warner Brothers has this year, financially speaking, as far as massive hits are concerned, is the Barbie film. And even that movie, they still have to end up splitting. They still have to end up splitting their overall profits with Mattel. And so it's still not likely going to be enough to actually make up for the amount of losses that they are seeing in many of the other films. Aquaman 2 is set right now to be to be just as bad as some of these others. It says overseas, it's a much better story for Aquaman 2, with a 73 market launch looking to deliver around 75 to 80 million, including China. That worldwide debut at its highest would be 110 through Sunday. The Middle Kingdom, which is a prime territory for the first movie, is looking at around 25 to 30 million dollars. And so remember, when it talks about that 75 to 80 million, that means, again, roughly a quarter, if not more, of the entire international opening is coming from one country, China, of which they only get 25% of the actual cut, right? As far as the actual studio gets 25% of that actual cut. So again, they're trying to paint this as a great picture, saying, well, hey, 80 million is a lot bigger than 40 million, but both numbers are just not looking good. They're just not in the position that they want to be in. So we're talking here, right, about a worldwide debut. It says at its highest would be around $110 million by the end, again, by the actual weekend itself. $110 million global opening is not good. And we'll go into the actual box office projections as to why that is the case in just a second. But again, those are right now the early indicators for the Aquaman film. It goes on to say that Shazam! Fury of the Gods had $30.1 million. The Flash had a $55 million, despite all good intentions to make that a great movie. Oh boy. Blue Beetle had $25 million. So we're kind of getting a better understanding of where this film actually ends up being. And so we actually have here a beautiful chart, because we love charts here over at OMB Reviews. I've been doing this for most of the franchise titles, right? Most of, especially the franchises that have a very long history of films and movies. And so I've already done this for movies like Blue Beetle and The Flash and Shazam 2. And this is a look at, okay, what is the actual comparison of Aquaman Lost Kingdom's projected opening weekend domestically going to look like compared to previous films, right? Previous films and the previous DCE films at that. So adding what we had over on the the numbers for Deadline and what they are reporting, we also have the 4-day weekend numbers also for what the people at Box Office Pro are thinking. $29 to $40 million is also what they are kind of thinking as well. So using that metric of $29 to $40 million, when I'm able to plug that in, what you see is that means on average, or at least based off of the average ticket price nationally, which right now in the United States is about $13 or so on average, we're looking at this film selling around 2.6 million tickets. Now, the good news is that is much better than what Blue Beetle's was. Blue Beetle had 1.9 million tickets, had an opening weekend of around $25.4 million domestically. But look at that number compared to a film like The Flash. The Flash, which was itself a terrible opening, which by itself was just already bad news from the very beginning, was around 4.2 million tickets, $55 million opening. And then you have Shazam 2, which was one of the biggest box office bombs of the summer. And look, that film only sold around 2.3 million tickets. So this movie, Aquaman, is actually in the same ballpark as Shazam 2. That's just to kind of give you that framework, right? So prior to that, you would also see, right, remember COVID era Birds of Prey, which had every excuse in the book as to why the film didn't do well. It ultimately came down to also the film just being crap. Even that film had 3.5 million tickets sold. And so Birds of Prey had a greater opening weekend domestically than Aquaman Lost Kingdom. One was dealing with COVID, one is not, and one is coming off of the first film, breaking $1 billion and being the only DCEU film to actually hit that $1 billion mark. Danger, danger, danger. There's really no other way that you could possibly spin it, but the people at Deadline and other places are obviously going to be trying to do just that. We do have some other overall projections for the weekend, including films like Migration. Its 4-day opening is around 16 to 25 million. Again, not great either. That coming from Universal. So it'll be interesting to see if this film is possibly able to have any type of legs in the long run that might help it, but right now, not looking that great. Wonka is right now looking at a 4-day total, and this is where things start to get actually positive in this case for the Warner Brothers brand, right? With Wonka, $27 to $37 million is what the 4-day total is. Now, what's interesting about that is that right now, Wonka theoretically could end up having a higher weekend this coming weekend, which is the same opening weekend as Aquaman 2, could end up being the #1 movie. So that is right now why, if you want to see just how bad those numbers are for Aquaman and why it's just really silly for the people at Deadline to try to be explaining it away and try to be, explaining, how it could possibly be, as good as they're saying, when Wonka is projected to have a very similar range. So if Box Office Pro ends up being correct in their overall projections here, again, on average, we're seeing around $34 million, $34.5 million projected from Box Office Pro for the Aquaman movie. Wonka would not be very far behind, and there is a potential, especially since I've just seen this film myself, and I think that the film overall, according to at least what I would say over on Critic List, which, by the way, if you've not seen Critic List, I highly recommend checking it out. It's an amazing site. Great place for movie reviewers, great place for conversations. It's not another social media site, but it is a darn good time. But I gave this film a 6.5, a 65%, a rad score. I thought that the film actually had a lot of heart to it. It does not do anything to try to tear down the previous source material. And if anything, it pays a lot of beautiful homages to the original film from Gene Wilder. Now, obviously, Timothée Chalamet is not a Gene Wilder and by no means could ever be even compared to him. But overall, he is, I think, working very well for this younger version of the actual character. And I think having the people behind Paddington be the same people behind this film is, I think, a good choice that they ended up making, because overall it was fine. And I think because of that, because the film is okay, right? Because the film is even, on the low end of being a rad film, I do think that ultimately what you're going to see are a lot of families and a lot of kids especially being drawn to see the film and being drawn to the theater. And that, I think, is going to be the big family movie over this holiday season. So I think big things are coming from Wonka, if I had to make guesses right now, whereas I don't think the same can be said for films like Migration, and definitely cannot be said for Aquaman 2, or rather Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. And again, it'll be interesting to see the battle between those two films. Some other long-range forecasting from Box Office Pro, and again, these have not been updated in a little while, but they, again, originally were projecting $29 to $38 million for over the 3-day, 38 to 51 over the 4 days. So notice that their numbers have already gone down quite a bit, right? So their original projection based off of the numbers was 38 to 51. Now their projection is 34, around 34 and a half on average for the 4-day weekend. So it's not looking good. Their overall domestic total was 100 to 155. That also would be quite abysmal. And seeing that this film costs well over, $200 million at the box office, 205 is what's being reported. It has to make at least 512 million, and that is on a conservative end. More likely has to make somewhere closer to 600 plus million. It's not likely going to make that from the internationals, and even if it does, because a lot of that probably will be coming from China. It's just not going to end very well. So Aquaman right now is set to be another box office bust. How the mighty have fallen, right? You go to the Captain Marvel film, right, in that series, which made over $1 billion, and we know the reason why was because it was, Marvel at the height. It was set up as a film you had to see before Endgame, and it was therefore put out a month before it, and so it was able to add on and be able to take a ride on that hype train because of how great Infinity War was, and then of course the anticipation for Endgame. Whereas a film, in the case of Aquaman The Lost Kingdom, right, comes off of the $1 billion film that the first one was, which also I think was predominantly driven because it had a much higher female demographic showing up to see someone like Jason Momoa, but it also had that very strong male audience there too. Something tells me that I wouldn't be surprised if you have still a higher, amount of people percentage-wise, right, a higher share of the audience still being women, being maybe drawn because of Jason Momoa or other reasons, but not having nearly as many of the guys who were originally driving a lot of the DCEU movies, who have kind of fallen by the wayside and have not been showing up. And so, again, you have a film that costs the amount of money that at the height these films were able to make their money back and break even on. And now, of course, they're nowhere close, bottom of the barrel of the franchises. And so all that we could say is it's going to be really, really bad for that film. Iron Claw is a film I'm actually really excited to see. This film comes out tonight. I got my ticket to go see it. $2 to $5 million was the original projection. 10 to 26 million, A24 release. Again, sounds about right for that kind of film. For Migration from Universal, they only project it to domestically make 112 to 167. So I think because this is a newer franchise that they're trying to start off, it's not going to get that same name recognition. There might be some people who bring their families out because of the Universal brand, of the Illumination brand. Apparently, there's going to be a Minions short as well before Migration. And so maybe that's going to be how they try to get some people's foot in the door. But it looks like at least early projections indicate, unless it is able to kind of catch fire, as we've seen some other films, like, for instance, last year's The Last Wish, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, was able to catch fire, was able to hold strong. Unless we see that happen, we're going to see this film also not really do all that well, though this movie also costs quite a bit less, $72 million there, so only needs to make roughly $180 million or so to break even. And so I definitely think that it's actually a stronger chance for it to do that. The question really is going to be, does it make enough money, not just to break even and make some profit, but to justify continuing on with any universe that they're trying to set up. Smaller films, Boys in the Boat, $1.5 million to $4 million. Color Purple, this is again Christmas Day release, $16 to $22 million was the initial projection, $75 to $125 overall. And as I said, do not be surprised that this film costs $100 million or more. I would not be surprised if this film had a very similar cost to what we saw from the West Side Story movie, which cost way more than it should have, and therefore was not able to even come close to doing as well as it should have. Color Purple is going to be a predominantly domestic release. It's not going to make much money, I imagine, overseas. Its story is going to be very unique to the United States, and because it deals with, of course, a story during the slave era. And so I think because of that, you're just not going to see those international audiences show up to it. They just have not really shown interest in those kinds of stories. Whereas the domestic, obviously there is a domestic audience that might have interest in seeing that. It's also a remake, and the original was a film that got a lot of awards accolades. I just don't think that this was a film that really needed to be remade, and I don't think people were really asking for it to be remade. I know that this film is also the musical adaptation, so who knows if that's going to bring in more or not, but musicals have not been selling really all that well more recently. Ferrari, new film from Neon, looks interesting, $4 to $8 million domestic, $20 to $40 million overall. Again, for the kind of movie that it is, sounds okay, but I don't know the budget yet on that movie. And then also later on, you've got some other January releases. All right, now let's go into the actual charting. Again, we like doing charts here over at OMB Reviews. Right now, when you look at the numbers for Wonka, right now it's around $166 million as far as the last time that I updated my chart. Let me see if there's any updates to these numbers by going here. I have it set to auto update, and so every now and then I have to undo it like that. So we like to do things live here. But let's see. Right now, Wonka is sitting around 166, so it's still the same. So right now we're at $87 million in the red. But, as we said, it's set to be either the number 1 or number 2 film here at the domestic box office. And so, because of that, Wonka is going to probably make a pretty big dent in that number that it still owes back this coming weekend and into the holiday frame. And so that's why I am thinking this movie will probably end up being quite a strong performer in the long run. And so a very good sign right now for Wonka to do pretty well. As I mentioned, with Aquaman and with Migration, I think the numbers for both are going to be low. Migration's only benefit is that it cost as little as it did. And so it might be able to just make that out from just the general audiences that want to see and want to support the Illumination brand. Aquaman, though, I just don't see it. I really do not see a path forward for that movie being able to do much of anything. And again, especially because of what we saw with the breakdown I did here. So just as a key, and again, to keep this in mind, for a movie like, for instance, that of, let's see, the biggest of these being Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, right? When you take into account that a huge portion of what's going to be given to the Aquaman film internationally is going to be from China, right? We look at the international totals for Guardians of the Galaxy, around 86 million was made from China. Because they only got a 25% cut of that, though, that cut down their overall box office by quite a bit. And the reason why, and therefore because of that, just taking on paper what they gave us as far as the actual again, as far as the actual, budget and the marketing budget as well, right? 250, 375, even though it probably cost a bit more in the marketing, has been various reports about that, means that the film was not able to break even. And if it was, to barely break even at that. So add to that Aquaman, which is not going to be able to get to the $845 million that Guardians was able to get to, and add to that a similar budget, maybe a little bit less overall, but still a similar budget, similar marketing budget as well, and you have yourself a catastrophic situation for them, especially, again, when you take into account the cut that's going to be taken from that China number. But those are the numbers as they stand. Let me know your thoughts. Are you having any plans to go and see some of these movies? As I said, with Wonka, just to give you an idea, it had a 62% drop on its first Monday, so not the worst drop that we've seen. Pretty steep, but also no one really went to see the movies on Monday, right? Obviously, because we're getting into a holiday frame. What I'm more interested in, though, is not just the Monday drop-off, but look what happened on Tuesday. It actually went up 47%. So it saw an increase because of Discount Tuesday. So that's, of course, a very good sign to see. And then from that increase Tuesday, it then only dropped 26% for the Wednesday chart, which is the most recent chart that we have. So what it tells me is that Wonka, especially now that kids are starting to get out of schools, is getting that family audience, is getting the people who are going to be out of school this week and next week. And I think over the holiday frame, just as some are predicting and projecting, just like here on Box Office Pro, 27 to 37 million, I do think that we're going to see that. I think that right now Wonka has a chance of getting that number one spot, even against domestically Aquaman 2. Can't say I'd be surprised if that happened based off of what we've been seeing from DCEU, and also the fact that Wonka is not a terrible movie. But again, we'll be following that. What are y'all's thoughts about this? Do you plan on seeing Aquaman 2? Do you plan on seeing any of the films that are coming out this weekend? And also, what are y'all's thoughts about them? Do you think that Aquaman is going to be yet another DC Warner Brothers flop? Do you think that Wonka is going to make its money back, able to do well in various other markets? I think it'll have some staying power. And also, any of the other films I mentioned or things that I may have forgotten, let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Loud at that fire button. Ask you to the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Probably won't see y'all until after the Christmas holiday. So I hope you all have a very merry and blessed Christmas. I'll try and get a box office breakdown out on this Sunday, but obviously it's Christmas Eve. So again, if I don't get one, I can't really say I'm going to be sorry for that, because obviously family comes first. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed, a Merry Christmas. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members for the month of November, starting off with Father Luca Illich, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, the name Eagle Rider. Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Matt317, check out his Twitch channel. Laura, the Mother Major General Story. Sorry, I didn't have enough spirit fingers there. Mr. Roy and ZK Man, who can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below. You get access to things like the giveaways channel, a podcast that I try to do every single month with a bunch of other awesome YouTubers, and a plethora of other content. So go ahead and check that out if you want more. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.